At my daughter's funeral, I saw her white husband on the phone with a smile discussing how to take her house. He thought I wouldn't find out anything. Subscribe. Write in the comments what city you're watching from. The scent of lilies still lingered in Mary's clothes as she closed the door behind her. The house was quiet, too quiet, as if it too were mourning, holding its breath in reverence for the loss it had witnessed. Mary stood in the hallway for a moment, her hand still resting on the doorknob, her chest heavy with grief that had not yet found words. Behind her, the late afternoon light stretched across the hardwood floors, golden and soft, indifferent to the sorrow it illuminated. The funeral had passed like a dream, hazy, unbearable, surreal. The image of her daughter, Joyce, lying still in that gleaming white coffin, would forever remain etched into Mary's mind. Joyce, her only child, her pride, her reason to wake up each morning, was gone. Taken too soon by a cruel illness that devoured her strength while leaving her spirit stubbornly intact until the final days. She had fought until the end, but Mary suspected that Joyce had known long before she admitted it that the end was inevitable. Mary had tried to stay composed during the service. She wore her best church hat, a soft gray one with a satin band, and the black suit that she had worn to her own mother's funeral 22 years ago. She stood beside her granddaughter, Amara, and held the girl's hand tightly, drawing strength from the presence of the last remaining piece of Joyce. Amara was just 17, too young to bury a mother, too old to be shielded from reality. She stood silent, her face a mask of stunned composure, her other hand clutching a folded program with trembling fingers. The church had been full, more than Mary expected, though she should not have been surprised. Joyce had always moved through life with a quiet but determined grace. She worked as a counselor at the local women's shelter and volunteered her weekends teaching literacy to immigrant women. Her kindness had left its mark on many, and those people came. Neighbors, co-workers, former students, even a few clients, many white, many black, all touched by Joyce's patience, her steadiness, her unshakable belief in second chances. Mary remembered every moment of the service, the hymns, the eulogies, the weeping. She had barely noticed when the pastor finished his final prayer and the guests began to trickle out into the reception hall. The murmur of conversation floated like fog through the corridors. Mary hadn't wanted to speak. She nodded politely, accepted condolences with a mute kind of grace, but her soul had already retreated. Grief was too immense for words. At the reception, amidst the clinking of cups and soft gospel music playing through the church's speakers, Mary felt suffocated. The noise, the platitudes, the insincere reassurances. She needed air. She stepped outside to the church's side garden, where roses bloomed stubbornly against the encroaching autumn chill. She sat alone on a wrought iron bench, let her fingers trail over the rough metal, and tried to remember how to breathe. That's when she heard it. The voice floated around the corner, just beyond the hedge that separated the garden from the small staff parking lot. A man's voice, familiar. "I told you, it's just a matter of time. The old lady's on her way out, and once probate clears, the house is mine." Mary froze. Her spine stiffened and her breath caught in her throat. She leaned forward just enough to hear more. "We can flip it. It's in a decent neighborhood, and with some updates, the market value will skyrocket. I've already got a guy lined up to assess it. I just need to deal with the paperwork and keep her from stalling." It was Andrew, her son-in-law, her fingers clenched around the edge of the bench, knuckles turning white. She dared not move. "She's got no legal claim," he continued, his tone confident, dismissive. Joyce and I were married. That house falls to me now. She just doesn't know it yet." Mary sat frozen, blood roaring in her ears. She hadn't heard the other voice. Whoever Andrew was talking to either wasn't responding or wasn't close enough for her to hear. But it didn't matter. She had heard enough. Her breath came shallow and fast. The house. He was talking about Joyce's house. The house her daughter had bought long before she ever met Andrew. The house Joyce had closed on herself after getting her first promotion. She had been so proud. Mary remembered the day they picked out the paint color for the kitchen together, how Joyce insisted on a butter yellow because it felt like morning sunshine. And now Andrew claimed it as his own, like he had built it, like it had not been a symbol of Joyce's independence. His tone had not been grieving or even tired. It had been greedy, triumphant. When the sound of his voice faded, Mary remained on the bench for several minutes. Her hands trembled in her lap. The garden, once peaceful, now seemed laced with menace. She felt exposed, as if the ivy on the walls had ears. Eventually, she rose and returned to the reception, her face composed, her posture straight. No one would see her shaken. Not now. Inside, Andrew was chatting with one of Joyce's co-workers, a plastic smile plastered across his face. When their eyes met, he offered her a brief nod, one of strained civility. Mary responded with a faint lift of her chin. She said nothing. Her voice felt trapped behind the stone that now sat in her chest. Later that evening, back at home, Mary sat in Joyce's living room, which now seemed far colder than it had that morning. The sunlight had faded, replaced by shadows and the soft hum of the refrigerator from the adjoining kitchen. Amara had gone upstairs to rest, too exhausted to speak much during dinner. Mary didn't blame her. Grief came in waves, and the girl was adrift. Mary sat still for hours, staring at the framed photo of Joyce on the mantel. It had been taken just last summer, her daughter standing in the garden in a simple sundress, laughing, her hair caught in the breeze. The house had been blooming with life then. Now it felt like a shell. Her mind returned again and again to Andrew's words. The old lady. No legal claim. Flip it. She thought of Joyce's name on the deed. She had seen it herself years ago, but had she changed it after marrying Andrew? Had he found some loophole? Mary didn't know the details of her daughter's will, if one had even been drawn up. Joyce had been young. It hadn't seemed urgent. Mary stood and walked into the kitchen, her steps slow but purposeful. She opened the drawer where Joyce used to keep important papers. It was mostly empty now. A few utility bills, a notepad, an old recipe card in her handwriting. She opened another drawer, and another. Nothing. Finally, she turned off the kitchen light and stood in the darkened doorway, staring into the hallway that led to the office Joyce had used. She hadn't been in that room since the illness worsened, and Joyce had stopped working from home. Slowly, she walked down the hall and opened the door. The air was stale with disuse. The desk still had a mug on it, now dusty, and a notepad open to a to-do list from months ago. Mary turned on the lamp and approached the filing cabinet. It was locked. She found the key inside the desk drawer and began going through it. Most of the folders were labeled neatly: insurance, medical, work. She pulled each one out, flipping through them with growing frustration. Still nothing about the deed. Nothing about a will. But then, tucked in the very back, was a thin folder marked personal. Mary opened it and found a single business card inside. Leah Grayson, attorney at law. There was a handwritten note on the back. Meeting Ari, House, 2/14. Mary's heart beat faster. She did not know this Leah. Joyce had never mentioned a lawyer. But the date, just 2 weeks before she passed, was recent. What had Joyce done? What had she planned? Clutching the card in her hand, Mary returned to the living room and sat down slowly, as if her knees were too fragile to bear her weight. She stared at the card for a long time, then placed it on the coffee table beside the photo of Joyce. Her daughter's smiling face looked back at her with quiet strength. Mary nodded to the picture, just once. She would find this Leah, and she would find out exactly what Joyce had intended. The following morning, the sun poured through the tall windows of the living room, casting light across the cream-colored rug that Joyce had picked out herself 2 years ago during one of their mother-daughter weekend errands. It should have been comforting. Instead, it felt clinical, as though the brightness was exposing too much grief, confusion, fear, all laid bare in the light of day. Mary sat in her usual spot by the window with a cup of tea cradled in her hands. She hadn't slept much. The memory of Andrew's words from the funeral still clung to her like smoke, impossible to scrub away. She kept replaying his voice in her mind, dissecting the tone, the intent, the ownership in his language when he spoke about the house. Her daughter's house. No, not just Joyce's house. Her legacy. Every brick, every coat of paint, every corner had been a decision Joyce had made on her own. Mary had been there at the start, standing beside her daughter when she signed the purchase papers, her eyes sparkling with the thrill of becoming a homeowner in her early 30s. Mary remembered the way Joyce had stood in the empty living room that first day, hands on her hips, barefoot, already planning how she'd transform it into a warm and open home. Andrew had come into the picture after that. He had seemed charming at first, in that polished, surface-level way some men were. He knew when to smile, when to hold doors, when to say just enough to sound interested. Mary had never fully warmed to him, but she had done what most mothers do when their daughters fall in love. She stepped back. She convinced herself it wasn't her place to question, and Joyce, for all her perceptiveness, had been deeply in love with him, or perhaps deeply in need of something she believed he offered: security, admiration, a partner. But as the years went on, Mary had noticed things, the distance that had grown between them, not just geographically but emotionally. The way Joyce stopped visiting as often, stopped inviting her mother to dinner unless it was a holiday. The tension in Joyce's voice when she spoke about home life. A slight tremble in her hands when she reached for a teacup. She never outright said anything was wrong, but there had been signs. Now, in the silence of the morning, Mary began to piece them together with sharper focus. The way Andrew had slowly pushed her to the sidelines made her presence less and less welcome. The patronizing way he spoke to her during family gatherings. The way he never let Joyce handle discussions about finances or household decisions when they visited. Mary had chalked it up to mismatched personalities, but it had been more than that. He had been drawing boundaries, separating Joyce from her roots, from the very people who had helped her become the woman she was. Mary sighed and stood up, placing her teacup in the sink. She knew she couldn't let the morning slip away in idle reflection. She had a name: Leah Grayson. She pulled the business card from the drawer where she'd placed it the night before and stared at the simple black type. There was a calmness in the way it was printed. No excessive design, no embellishments. Just a name, a title, and a number. It was enough. By mid-morning, Mary was seated in the small waiting area of a modest but neatly arranged law office on the west side of town. A young woman at the front desk had taken her name and offered her a bottle of water, which Mary politely declined. She wasn't thirsty. She was anxious. Her fingers twisted around the strap of her handbag in her lap, and her eyes darted to the door every time someone passed by in the hallway. Finally, the door to the inner office opened, and a woman in her late 30s stepped out, her curly hair pulled back into a low bun, glasses perched on her nose. She looked surprised to see Mary, but not unkindly so. "Mrs. Wilson?" she asked gently. Mary rose. "Yes, I'm Mary Wilson, Joyce's mother." Leah nodded and extended her hand. "Of course. Please, come in." The office was small, but filled with natural light. A tall bookcase lined one wall, and framed degrees from Yale and Howard hung above a desk cluttered with case files and legal pads. Leah gestured for Mary to sit in the chair across from her. "I wasn't sure if you'd come," she said. "Joyce mentioned you might reach out." Mary blinked. "She did?" Leah nodded solemnly. "She didn't go into detail, but she said you were someone she trusted more than anyone. She wanted to make sure that, if something happened, you'd know where to go." Mary's throat tightened. She didn't tell me anything about this, about you. She wanted to, but she said things were delicate at home." Mary nodded slowly, understanding more in that sentence than Leah probably intended to reveal. "Did she leave anything with you? About the house?" Leah pulled open a file drawer and retrieved a manila envelope. "She did. Joyce came to me just over a month before she passed. She was concerned about what might happen if she didn't make her intentions clear, especially concerning the house and Amara." Mary leaned forward. "She knew what Andrew might try to do?" Leah looked her squarely in the eye. "She suspected. She didn't accuse him of anything specific, but she was worried. She told me she had bought the house herself, paid for everything independently before they were married, and that she wanted it to remain in her family, in your hands, if anything ever happened." She placed the envelope on the desk between them. "This is a transfer of property, signed and notarized, with accompanying documentation. The deed is now in your name, Mrs. Wilson." Mary stared at the envelope as though it might vanish. "She gave me the house? She didn't want it to be taken from you, and she wanted Amara to have a safe home, one where you would decide what happened to it, not Andrew?" Tears stung the corners of Mary's eyes, but she blinked them away. She thought of everything. Leah opened another file. "There's more. She also left a letter for you." Mary took the envelope with trembling hands. She didn't open it, not yet, not here. She wanted to be alone when she read her daughter's final words. "There's one more thing," Leah said, her voice lowering. "Joyce recorded a statement on video. It's not an official deposition, but it's her own account of why she wanted her property handled this way. If Andrew tries to contest the deed, it might help." Mary nodded slowly. "He will contest it. He already thinks it's his." Leah's mouth tightened. "Then we'll be ready." Back at home, Mary sat at Joyce's old writing desk in the bedroom, the letter unopened before her. Amara was out for a walk with a neighbor's daughter. Mary had encouraged it. The girl needed air, so did she, but not the kind that came from outside, the kind that came from truth. She broke the seal and unfolded the paper. "Dear Mama, if you're reading this, then I'm no longer here, and I'm sorry for that. I tried to fight it as long as I could, but the truth is I've been preparing for this in my heart for some time. There's so much I want to say, but not enough paper in the world to hold it all. So I'll say this. I've watched you all my life. The way you stood up for yourself, for me, for everything we believe in. I only found that strength because I saw it in you first. You taught me how to be a woman with pride, even in a world that didn't always see us as worthy. I don't know what Andrew will do after I'm gone. I wish I could believe he'd do the right thing, but I can't be sure. That's why I changed the deed. That house was mine, but it's always been our home. I want you and Amara to be safe. I want you to decide what happens next. Don't let him take it from you. From us. I love you more than I ever said out loud, but I think you always knew. Joyce Mary pressed the paper to her chest and wept. That night, she didn't sleep. Instead, she sat in Joyce's chair by the window, staring out into the darkness. The next morning, she found the courage to call Leah again and ask about next steps. And by the afternoon, she had the deed in her hand, a copy of the video file on a flash drive, and a folder of notarized papers she would guard with her life. She knew Andrew would come. He would come smiling, courteous, pretending he was just settling affairs. But she would be ready. This time, she would not shrink. This time, she would fight. Andrew arrived 2 days later, just as Mary had predicted. He came in the late morning, dressed in a tailored navy blazer that did little to soften the steely gleam in his eyes. He pulled up in his silver Audi, the same one he'd refused to let Joyce drive during the last year of her life, claiming her reflexes weren't sharp enough for such a car. Mary watched him from the living room window, her lips pressed into a firm line. The moment he stepped out of the vehicle, she could see it in the way he moved. The confidence, the arrogance, the assumption that everything in front of him would eventually be his. She didn't bother to meet him at the door. She let him ring the bell twice before she opened it, slowly, deliberately, making him wait. He smiled in that strained, white-toothed way of his, the one that didn't touch his eyes. "Mary," he said, his voice overly warm, "I was hoping we could talk." She stepped aside and gestured him in. "I'm listening." He hesitated for a moment, as if unsure whether to be grateful or annoyed that she hadn't responded with a warmer welcome, then crossed the threshold. His eyes swept over the interior of the house with too much familiarity, pausing briefly on the family portrait still hanging above the fireplace. Joyce had insisted on that photo, a summer picnic scene in the park, Amara, only 8, grinning with missing teeth, Andrew standing stiffly beside them, his hand awkwardly on Joyce's shoulder. "I know this has been a difficult time," he began, stepping into the living room. "I thought it might be helpful to sit down and discuss some practical matters." Mary closed the door quietly and followed him in, her hands clasped calmly in front of her. Andrew took a seat in Joyce's armchair without asking. It was a small act, but to Mary, it screamed entitlement. He leaned forward, elbows on knees, adopting a posture that suggested concern. "I've been speaking with a probate attorney," he said, watching her carefully. "We need to begin organizing Joyce's affairs. There are the bank accounts, her investments, of course, and then there's the house." Mary sat across from him, expression unreadable. "What about the house?" "Well," he said with a chuckle that was meant to sound humble, "I think we both know it's a lot of space for just one person. I understand your attachment to it, but Joyce and I were married, and by state law—" Mary held up a hand, slow and calm. "The house is in my name now." His smile faltered. "Excuse me?" "I said the deed is in my name. Joyce made the transfer before she passed." Andrew blinked. His face twitched, but he quickly schooled his features into something resembling politeness. "That's impossible," he said, though his voice had grown sharper. "We were married. That house was community property." Mary stood and walked to the nearby console table, retrieved a folder and returned, handing it to him without a word. Andrew opened it and glanced through the documents. She watched the progression of emotions play across his face: confusion, disbelief, and finally anger, thinly veiled behind clenched teeth. "This doesn't change anything," he said quietly, flipping through the pages too quickly to read. "She didn't have a right to do this behind my back." "She had every right," Mary replied evenly. "She bought the house herself with her own money before she ever met you. She made sure the transfer was legal and complete. Her attorney made sure of it." Andrew stood, his voice rising. "This is absurd. She didn't tell me anything about this. If she wanted to—" "She didn't want to fight," Mary interrupted. "She wanted to protect what was hers, and she knew what you'd try to do. She knew you'd come for it, and she was right." He stared at her, the mask slipping further with each passing second. His tone dropped, icy and measured. "Do you really think this will stand? You think a court's going to side with you, a retiree, squatting in a house that should have gone to her husband? I have legal standing. This is a matter of inheritance law." "You're welcome to take it to court," Mary said, her voice as steady as it had ever been. "And if you do, we'll present Joyce's recorded statement. The deed, the video, the letter, we'll let a judge decide." Andrew's eyes narrowed. "So that's your plan? Drag this out and play the victim?" "No," Mary replied. "My plan is to honor my daughter's wishes." He didn't reply at first. Instead, he walked to the window and looked out at the garden. Joyce's roses were still in bloom, defiant against the crisp air of approaching winter. Mary had trimmed them herself last week, determined not to let them wither in her grief. Andrew turned back, his hands on his hips. "You know, this place is worth close to $500,000, right? You're sitting on an opportunity that could change Amara's life. College tuition, a better neighborhood, a real future. Do you really want to cling to sentiment while she misses out on all that?" Mary's lips thinned. "You don't get to pretend this is about Amara." His mouth twitched, the faintest flicker of anger. "You think I'm some kind of monster, don't you? Because I'm white? Because I worked hard to build a future for my family, and I don't want to see it wasted?" Mary felt the heat rising in her chest but refused to let it show. "I think you're someone who didn't respect Joyce, who wanted to control her, control everything, but she saw through it. Maybe too late, but not too late to stop you from taking what wasn't yours." He stepped forward, invading her space. "I have every intention of fighting this, legally, financially, publicly if I have to. I won't let you steal what belongs to me." Mary looked him in the eye. "Try me." There was a beat of silence so thick it pressed down on the room like a storm cloud. Andrew exhaled sharply, scoffing, then grabbed his coat from the back of the chair. "This isn't over," he muttered. Mary watched him walk to the door, his steps quick and uneven, no longer the confident gait of a man certain of victory. He opened the door and paused, looking back. "I gave up a lot to be with Joyce," he said bitterly. "I'm not walking away empty-handed." Then he was gone. Mary closed the door behind him and stood for a long moment, breathing in the silence. Her hands trembled, not from fear, but from the residual pulse of adrenaline. She walked back to the living room, sat down, and allowed herself a moment to exhale. The folder lay on the coffee table, a small shield of paper and ink against the storm. Later that afternoon, Amara returned from school, her backpack slung low, her eyes tired. She paused in the entryway, noticing the folder, the change in her grandmother's demeanor. "He came, didn't he?" she asked. Mary nodded. "He'll be back," Amara said. "Yes," Mary agreed, "but so will I." That night, Mary called Leah and recounted everything. The lawyer's voice was calm, assuring. They would prepare, they would document, they would not be intimidated. But even after she hung up, Mary found herself unable to rest. The house felt different now, not just because of Joyce's absence, but because of the threat that now hovered, shadow-like, at the edge of everything. She knew Andrew. He wouldn't stop until he was forced to. And that meant this wasn't merely about a house. It was about legacy, dignity, and the right to define what family meant. She walked through the house slowly, touching the walls, the photos, the worn banister. Each one held memory, meaning. Each one whispered Joyce's name. The house had never felt more alive. In her bedroom, she pulled Joyce's letter from the drawer and read it again. The words steadied her. They reminded her that she wasn't just fighting for bricks and wood. She was fighting for what her daughter had built, for what she believed in, for the truth that couldn't be buried even in death. When she finally slept, it was with the knowledge that the pressure had only just begun. But so had her resistance. The next week passed in a haze of quiet tension, each day stretching longer than the last, weighed down by a kind of heavy anticipation. Mary went about her days with a sense of purpose, keeping herself busy with routine, rinsing dishes, folding laundry, trimming the hedges in the small front garden, but her mind was never still. Everything felt like a breath held too long, waiting to be released. The house was no longer a place of passive mourning. It had become a contested space, a battlefield in waiting. Andrew had not returned since their last encounter, but Mary knew he was not done. He was regrouping, speaking with lawyers, building a case. His silence was not retreat, it was calculation. The threat of his next move was like a storm cloud sitting just beyond the horizon, silent but looming. And Mary, despite her resolve, felt that pressure like a second skin. It was late Thursday afternoon when the call came. Leah's voice on the other end of the line was calm, but there was something in it, a firmness, a preparation, that told Mary the next stage had begun. "He's filed," Leah said plainly, "a motion to contest the deed. He's claiming it was done under undue influence, that Joyce wasn't of sound mind when she signed the transfer." Mary sat very still in her armchair, the phone warm against her cheek. The room around her felt suddenly quiet, as if holding its breath along with her. "What do we do?" she asked. "We respond," Leah said. "I've already drafted the reply and included a petition to admit Joyce's will to probate. There's something else, Mary. Joyce didn't just change the deed. She also left a will, a full one, signed, notarized, witnessed, and it supports everything she did." Mary exhaled slowly, her shoulders sinking as if some invisible weight had lifted from them. "She never told me," she whispered. "She kept so much to herself." "She was protecting you," Leah replied gently. "She knew it would come to this, and she wanted everything to be in place, so you wouldn't be left to scramble in the aftermath." Mary didn't speak for a moment. Her eyes wandered to the photograph of Joyce and Amara in the hallway, taken during a school field trip to the botanical gardens. They both had flowers in their hair, huge smiles, sunlight catching in their curls. Mary hadn't even known the picture had been taken until months later, when she saw it framed on Joyce's desk. "When will the will be read?" she asked. "I've scheduled a formal reading," Leah said. "Saturday morning. Here at my office. I've already notified Andrew." Mary nodded, though no one could see it. "I'll be there." On the morning of the reading, the sky was overcast, the kind of thick gray that seemed to press against the windows, dimming the rooms even at midday. Mary dressed with care, choosing a dark plum blouse and black slacks. She pinned on the brooch Joyce had given her for her 65th birthday, a small gold bird perched on a branch. Her hands were steady, but her chest felt tight with nerves. Amara watched her from the doorway. "Do you want me to come?" the girl asked softly. Mary turned, touched by the offer but certain of her answer. "No, baby. Not this time. But thank you." Amara nodded and returned to her room without argument. She had grown quieter in recent days, more contemplative. Mary knew the strain of everything was wearing on her, too, even if she didn't say so out loud. The girl had lost her mother, and now her father, though still present in body, was actively attacking the only home she had left. The drive to Leah's office was quiet. Mary took her time, arriving a few minutes early. She sat in the parking lot for a moment, watching the raindrops begin to freckle her windshield, then stepped out and walked with purpose into the building. Leah greeted her with a calm smile and led her into a small conference room with a polished wood table and a pair of leather chairs on each side. A car pulled into the lot a few minutes later, and Mary recognized the silver Audi through the rain-streaked window. Andrew stepped out, his umbrella snapping open with mechanical precision. He entered moments later, nodding tersely to both women. "Let's get this over with," he said, removing his coat and taking a seat without invitation. Mary sat across from him, her face impassive. Leah took her place at the head of the table, a thick folder in front of her. She adjusted her glasses and opened the file. "This will be a formal reading," she began. "Joyce Elise Gardner, being of sound mind and full mental capacity, executed this last will and testament on March 4th of this year, in accordance with the laws of this state. It was witnessed by 2 legal observers and notarized at the time of signing." She cleared her throat gently and began to read. "To my husband, Andrew Gardner," she read, her voice steady, "I leave the sum of $1,000, with the sincere hope that he uses it to seek counseling for his profound inability to see others as equals rather than possessions. I leave no further assets to Andrew, not out of malice, but out of clarity. He has never respected the autonomy of those around him, including mine, and I believe it is unwise to entrust him with any further control." Andrew made a sound like a scoff, then leaned back in his chair, his face hardening. Leah continued without pause. "To my daughter, Amara Louise Gardner, I leave my remaining savings, personal belongings, and the full contents of my journal library, which I hope will help her remember who I was and who she is capable of becoming. All funds are to be held in trust until she reaches the age of 21, to be managed by Mary Lillian Wilson." Mary blinked, absorbing each word like a drop of rain after drought. "To my mother, Mary Lillian Wilson, I leave full legal custody of Amara Louise Gardner, with the belief that no one else will raise her with the same love, dignity, and cultural understanding that she herself instilled in me. I also confirm the transfer of my home at 804 Sinclair Avenue to her sole ownership, including all rights, responsibilities, and decisions regarding its future." Andrew sat forward suddenly. "She can't do that," he said sharply. "This is manipulation. She was sick. She didn't know what she was doing." "She passed a mental competency exam 1 week before the signing," Leah replied calmly. "And a video of that session exists. Her doctors signed off. The witnesses were independent. You're welcome to challenge the will in court, Mr. Gardner, but I assure you it's airtight." Andrew's face was flushed, his jaw tight. "She's robbing me from beyond the grave." "No," Mary said for the first time, her voice even. She's protecting what you tried to take." He turned to her, eyes cold. "You think you've won?" "This was never a game," she replied. "This is my daughter's life, her home, her child, not a transaction." Leah closed the folder, her expression unchanged. "This concludes the reading. Copies will be provided. Legal action may be filed through the appropriate channels. You're now dismissed." Andrew stood abruptly, yanking his coat from the back of the chair. "This isn't the end," he muttered, then stormed from the room. Mary remained seated, her hands resting on the polished table, her eyes fixed on the folder. Leah gave her a moment before speaking. "She did all of this for you." Mary nodded slowly. "I just wish she had told me." "She didn't want you to worry," Leah said. "She wanted you to live your life without fear. She wanted you to have this, on your own terms." When Mary returned home, Amara was waiting by the window, her homework forgotten on the table. "Well?" she asked, stepping forward. Mary smiled for the first time in days. She thought of everything. She embraced her granddaughter, holding her close, feeling the weight of responsibility settle over her shoulders. But it was a weight she would carry with pride. That night, Mary stood on the porch and looked out into the quiet street. The air was cool, the rain had stopped, and the wind carried the scent of wet earth and blooming roses. Inside, the house was warm. Amara's laughter floated down from upstairs as she spoke to a friend on the phone. Mary closed her eyes. Joyce's will had not just preserved the house. It had preserved the heart within it. The news of Andrew's lawsuit arrived 3 days after the reading of Joyce's will. Though Mary had anticipated it, had even rehearsed her reaction in the mirror, she still felt the same cold ripple through her chest when the envelope arrived. It came by courier, delivered directly to the house with a signature required. The man who handed it over offered a polite smile, unaware of the storm he had just handed to her in a white envelope with her full name printed in neat black ink. She opened it slowly, deliberately, as if moving with care could dull the sharpness of what lay inside. The words were formal, predictably harsh in their precision. Andrew Gardner was officially contesting the will, challenging the legality of the property transfer, questioning Joyce's mental competency, and asserting his rights as the surviving spouse to claim an equitable share of her estate, including full custody of Amara. Mary sat down at the kitchen table, her fingers resting on the pages, her eyes tracing and retracing each line. She had known this was coming. Leah had warned her that Andrew wouldn't go quietly, and that his pride and entitlement would drive him to strike back through the system that had long favored men like him. Confident, wealthy, white. Still, reading it made it real. This was not just a family dispute. It was a legal war. She called Leah immediately. Her voice was calm, but her fingers tapped nervously against the table. "He filed," she said simply. "I know," Leah replied. "I got my copy a few minutes ago. We'll respond swiftly." "Will we win?" "We have the law on our side," Leah said, measured. "Joyce's documentation is thorough, the video is strong, and the witnesses are credible. But that doesn't mean it won't be a fight." Mary nodded, gripping the receiver tightly. She could already feel the heat of battle rising, already hear the voices of strangers questioning her right to her own daughter's legacy. The weeks that followed passed in a blur of meetings, paperwork, and rising tension. Leah filed their official response within 48 hours, countering every claim in Andrew's petition. She submitted copies of Joyce's medical records, letters from her doctors confirming full cognitive ability at the time of the deed transfer, and affidavits from the witnesses present at the will signing. They even included the video. Joyce sitting upright in Leah's office, her voice steady and clear, articulating her reasons for excluding Andrew from her estate, and her deep concern that he would attempt to undo her wishes. Still, Andrew persisted. He hired a high-profile attorney from a prestigious downtown firm, a man with a reputation for ruthless litigation and an impressive win record. He began giving interviews to local news outlets, painting himself as the grieving widower, unfairly shut out by a manipulative mother-in-law. He spoke of his love for Joyce, of his commitment to Amara, and his disbelief that the woman he had loved would leave him with nothing. The media, hungry for drama, devoured his version. They printed photos of him standing solemnly at Joyce's grave, quoted him talking about legacy and justice, and labeled the case a heartbreaking family feud. Mary's phone rang endlessly with reporters seeking comments. She said nothing. Leah advised against it. "Let him talk," she said. "The truth will speak for itself." Amara, meanwhile, grew quieter. The headlines were everywhere, at school, online, even whispered about by neighbors. She came home one afternoon with her shoulders drawn tight, her lips trembling. "People at school are saying awful things," she said, dropping her backpack on the floor. "That you're stealing from my dad, that you manipulated Mom. One girl said maybe you brainwashed her because she was sick." Mary's chest ached at the sight of her granddaughter's pain. She took Amara's hands in hers gently. "People say things they don't understand," she said. "Your mother knew what she wanted. She trusted me to make sure it happened." Amara nodded, but her eyes were glassy. "He's lying," she whispered. "He's saying she was confused, but she wasn't, Grandma. I saw her. I lived here. She knew exactly what she was doing." "I know, baby," Mary said, "and we'll prove it." The trial was set for mid-January, giving both sides a month to prepare. The day it began, Mary dressed in the same plum blouse she had worn to the will reading. It had become her armor, a small but potent reminder of Joyce's strength. Leah met her at the courthouse steps, her briefcase in one hand, her eyes sharp behind her glasses. Inside, the courtroom was cool and sterile, the kind of place where emotion went to die. The judge, a stern woman in her 60s, presided with an air of no-nonsense efficiency. Andrew sat on the opposite side, flanked by his lawyer. He wore a dark suit and a face carefully composed for sympathy. But Mary saw the tightness in his jaw, the way his fingers twitched against the edge of the table. He was angry. He had not expected a real fight. Leah opened their case with clarity and strength. She presented the will, the medical records, and the video footage of Joyce. The court watched in silence as Joyce appeared on the screen, speaking with deliberate calm. She explained her decisions, her fears, her reasons for excluding Andrew. She spoke of her desire to protect Amara, to ensure the home she had built stayed in the hands of someone she trusted. Andrew's attorney objected, claiming emotional manipulation, but the judge overruled him. Then came the witnesses. Joyce's doctor testified first, confirming her cognitive health in the months before her death. He described her as lucid, articulate, fully aware of her legal decisions. The nurse who had cared for her testified next, speaking of Joyce's private concerns about Andrew's controlling behavior, her desire to ensure Amara's well-being. Finally, Mary took the stand. She spoke slowly, each word measured, her voice steady despite the pressure. She described Joyce's independence, her pride in the home, her deep love for Amara. She spoke of Andrew's distance, his coldness, his efforts to separate Joyce from her family. She did not speak with venom, only with truth. Andrew's attorney tried to rattle her, questioning her memory, her motives, even her health. "You're not a young woman, Mrs. Wilson," he said. "Is it possible you misunderstood your daughter's intentions?" Mary met his gaze evenly. "I may not be young, but I'm not confused. Joyce was my child. I knew her better than anyone. She made her wishes clear." The defense argued next, painting Mary as an interfering mother-in-law, casting doubt on Joyce's mental state, and portraying Andrew as a victim. But their witnesses were weak. Former co-workers with little contact in recent years, vague comments about Joyce's fatigue, her stress, nothing substantial, nothing that could undo the mountain of evidence Leah had presented. On the final day, Andrew took the stand. He spoke of loss, of betrayal, of a marriage filled with love. But as he spoke, cracks began to show. He fumbled under cross-examination, contradicted himself about key dates, avoided direct answers about the home's purchase history. When asked about Joyce's mental health, he resorted to vague assertions, unable to refute the medical documentation. Leah's final statement was brief but powerful. "This case is not about bitterness," she said. "It is not about vengeance. It is about honoring the wishes of a woman who did everything in her power to protect her child and her legacy. The law is clear, the will is valid, the deed is legal, and the evidence speaks louder than supposition." The judge took a day to deliberate. Mary spent that day in quiet reflection, walking the halls of the house, touching the walls, the doorknobs, the photographs. She didn't speak much, even to Amara, who hovered close, afraid to hope but unable to resist the flicker of it. The next morning, they returned to court. The judge's ruling was swift. The court finds that the last will and testament of Joyce Elise Gardner is valid. The property deed transfer is upheld. Full legal custody of Amara Louise Gardner is granted to Mary Lillian Wilson. The contestation is dismissed. Mary closed her eyes as the words washed over her. She didn't cry. She didn't smile. She simply exhaled, a breath she had been holding for weeks, maybe even months. Andrew said nothing. He stood, stiff and pale, and walked out of the courtroom without looking back. Outside, the air was cold and sharp, but the sun had broken through the clouds. Leah squeezed Mary's hand. "It's over," she said. Mary nodded. "No, it's just beginning." The victory in court did not bring an immediate sense of triumph. Instead, it brought stillness, the kind that follows a long storm, when the winds have died down, but the ground remains soaked and uneven. Mary stepped through the front door of the house that evening and was met by silence, not the absence of sound, but the quiet presence of home. It welcomed her not with celebration, but with the heavy comfort of a space that had endured alongside her. It had been the battleground. Now it could become sanctuary again. Amara had waited up for her. She sat curled in the armchair in the living room, knees pulled to her chest, a book forgotten in her lap. When Mary walked in, the girl looked up quickly, searching her grandmother's face for answers. She didn't need words. Mary gave a single nod, and Amara exhaled, the tension leaving her shoulders in one long breath. Mary crossed the room and gathered her into an embrace, holding her tightly, as if anchoring them both in that moment. "I knew she wouldn't let him win," Amara whispered. "Neither would I," Mary replied softly. That night they sat up late, eating the soup Mary had made the day before, talking about everything and nothing. The quiet between them had changed. It was no longer filled with worry, but possibility. Mary didn't sleep right away. She lay awake long after Amara's breathing had evened out, staring at the ceiling, thinking not just about what had been won, but what needed to happen next. The house, for all its warmth and memories, was still a house. It had been Joyce's creation, her project, her independence. But now it would need to serve a different purpose. It had to evolve into something that could support Mary and Amara through a new phase of life. It had to become a fortress, not one of stone and defense, but of stability, safety, and legacy. The next morning, Mary made a list. It was practical and matter-of-fact, just as Joyce would have done. The railing on the back steps needed tightening. The hallway light flickered and needed replacing. The upstairs bathroom had a slight leak. She noted each item without sentiment, but with quiet resolve. There was work to be done. She called a contractor recommended by a neighbor. He came the following week, a soft-spoken man named Mr. Whitaker who reminded her of her late brother Harold. Careful, deliberate, respectful. Together they walked through the house, and Mary showed him each corner that needed attention. He offered suggestions she hadn't considered. Grab bars in the bathroom, brighter lighting in the entryway, a small ramp at the front step to prevent tripping. "I'm not going anywhere," Mary told him, standing in the kitchen as he made notes on his clipboard. "This house is mine. My daughter made sure of that. I plan to live here for a long time." "Yes, ma'am," he said, smiling gently. "Let's make sure it works for you." The modifications began the following Monday. There was noise and dust, but Mary didn't mind. She watched each change with satisfaction, feeling as though she were not just maintaining a house, but reinforcing a promise. Amara helped where she could, though she still had school. In the afternoons, she would come home and ask questions about her mother, ones she had been too afraid or too sad to ask before. Mary answered them all, slowly stitching together the narrative of Joyce's life, piece by piece, as if rebuilding her memory in the walls that had once held her. One afternoon, while helping organize the storage closet, Amara found a box Mary had never seen before. Inside were photos, letters, and mementos Joyce had kept from her college years and early career. There were postcards from trips, notes from students, and a journal with pages filled with Joyce's handwriting, thoughtful, elegant, and strong. They sat on the floor together, reading through them, laughing at the jokes, crying at the reflections. It was a moment of rediscovery, of reclaiming the layers of a woman who had been both mother and daughter, teacher and friend, advocate and dreamer. Amara clutched the journal to her chest when they were finished. "I want to remember her like this," she said. "You will," Mary assured her, because she left herself behind in all the ways that matter. As the repairs concluded, Mary turned her attention to the garden. It had been Joyce's pride, her sanctuary. Mary found comfort in the soil, her hands digging and planting, turning over the earth like memory. The roses bloomed again in early spring, vibrant and unapologetic. Mary planted new things too: lavender, marigolds, tomatoes. She had no grand design, only the intention to keep something alive. Neighbors began to stop by again, some bringing pie, others simply offering their presence. Mary welcomed them with grace, feeling the subtle shift in how they looked at her now, not with pity or curiosity, but with respect. Word of the court case had spread, but she did not feel the need to explain or defend. The truth was known. Robert Jenkins, a retired teacher from 2 blocks over, brought over a stack of books one afternoon. "Joyce used to recommend these to my niece," he said. "Figured Amara might like them." Mary accepted them with a nod, placing them on the shelf Joyce had built in the living room. She was beginning to see the community not as spectators, but as threads in the fabric Joyce had woven. Evenings became her favorite time. She and Amara would cook dinner together. Joyce's recipes, sometimes altered, sometimes revered. They ate on the back porch, watching the light fade behind the trees, the sky turning from gold to indigo. Sometimes they spoke, sometimes they sat in silence. It was enough. One evening, Amara brought up the future. "I don't want to leave," she said, staring out at the garden. "When I go to college, I want to live here." Mary looked at her, surprised but not shocked. There was a steadiness in the girl's voice, a maturity that had grown quickly over the past months. "You should be on campus," Mary said. "Make friends. Find your way." "I will," Amara replied. "But I can do that and still live here, commute, help you. I want to be here." Mary felt a swell of emotion that she did not let rise to the surface. Instead, she reached over and took her granddaughter's hand. "We'll figure it out," she said. Spring melted into summer, and the house settled into a new rhythm. The past lingered, as it always would, but it no longer pressed down on them. It simply existed, a foundation upon which they could stand. Mary resumed old habits she had long abandoned, joining a book club at the local library, volunteering at the community center, attending church, not just on Sundays, but for midweek Bible study. She reconnected with friends she hadn't seen in years, many of whom had followed the story in the papers and were eager to offer their solidarity. But she spoke little about the trial. She did not need to relive it. Her focus was forward. Amara thrived. Her grades improved and her laughter returned. She decorated her room with posters and fairy lights, turned the small study into a workspace, and began tutoring younger students in math. She still carried grief, but it no longer defined her. She carried her mother's legacy now, and that gave her purpose. One afternoon, while organizing boxes in the attic, Mary found an envelope addressed to her in Joyce's handwriting. It was dated just 3 days before her passing. Inside was a short letter, barely a page. "Mama, if you're reading this, then everything is done. You've made it. I knew you would. This house is yours now, but more than that, it's your home. Fill it with whatever brings you joy. Paint the walls, plant the garden, laugh loudly. Let it be a place where Amara becomes a woman she was always meant to be. Don't let the fight consume you. I only fought to give you peace. Live in it. With all my love." Joyce Mary folded the letter and placed it in the top drawer of her nightstand. She lay back on the bed, letting the late afternoon light warm her face. She thought about Joyce, about the fierce, brilliant girl she had raised, the woman who had carved out her own space in the world and defended it to her last breath. She thought about Amara, growing into her own strength. And she thought about the house, once a battleground, now a refuge. There would always be challenges. The world outside had not changed, but inside these walls there was peace. There was purpose. And that was enough. The morning sun filtered through the gauzy curtains in Mary's bedroom, casting long, soft stripes across the hardwood floor. It was late summer now, and the days had taken on a slow, golden rhythm. The house breathed quietly in its routines, its old wood and new renovations settling into a shared rhythm. Outside, the marigolds bloomed bright orange beside the steps, and the lavender bushes sent their perfume through the open windows with every warm breeze. Mary sat in the kitchen with her second cup of tea, a notepad on the table, her glasses perched low on her nose as she looked over her handwriting from the evening before. It was a letter, one she had started weeks ago and never quite finished. There was no recipient, at least not one who could read it now, but she felt compelled to keep writing to Joyce as if their conversation had never truly ended. She paused, listening to the faint sounds coming from upstairs. Amara's quiet footsteps and the occasional clink of her laptop keys as she typed away at a scholarship essay. The girl had found her rhythm too. Over the past months, she had transformed, slowly and almost imperceptibly, into a young woman who spoke with confidence, who moved through the house like she belonged not just in its walls, but in its story. She had chosen to stay for her first year of college, commuting to the university 20 minutes away, just as she said she would. Mary had hesitated at first, concerned that Amara would miss out on something by not living in a dorm, but the girl had been resolute. And now, seeing her thrive, Mary knew it had been the right decision. They shared the house with a quiet, unspoken understanding. Amara had her space and her independence, and Mary had her routine and her freedom. But they also had each other. Meals cooked side by side, Saturday morning errands, the occasional television show watched together in companionable silence. It wasn't the life either of them had envisioned a year ago, but it had become something strong and full of quiet joy. The court battle had long since faded from public attention. Andrew had moved to another state, resurfacing only briefly in a bitter article in a business journal, complaining about the injustice of the legal system. He had not contacted Amara since the ruling, and she had made no effort to reach out to him. Mary knew that the wound of that abandonment ran deep, but she also saw the way Amara had learned to carry it, not as a burden, but as part of her armor. One late afternoon, as cicadas buzzed in the trees and the heat clung to the porch railings, Mary sat with Amara on the swing Joyce had installed years ago. They sipped lemonade and watched the light dance through the leaves. "Mom would have loved this," Amara said, her voice soft. "She would," Mary agreed. "She always loved the quiet moments the most." They swung gently, the wood creaking beneath them. Mary looked over at her granddaughter. Amara had Joyce's eyes, sharp, dark, full of questions, and her posture, straight-backed and steady even when the world around her shifted. "I've been thinking," Amara said after a pause, "about what I want to do after college." Mary smiled, already knowing there was more. "I don't want to leave this place. Not just the house, I mean. This community. I want to teach here, or work with the kids, or do something that matters. Something like what Mom did." Mary's chest tightened with pride. She would be so proud to hear that. "I think she knew," Amara said, "before she died. I think that's why she wanted me to be raised here. By you. In this house." They fell quiet again, the silence between them soft and full. Mary reached out and gently squeezed Amara's hand. "This house," she said slowly, "was built on choices. Every wall, every coat of paint, every flower out there. Your mother made those choices with care, and now we're living in them." Amara looked at her and nodded. "I want to make choices like that." The days passed with a kind of peaceful certainty. Mary spent time volunteering at the library, running a small reading circle for elementary school kids. She became a familiar face again, in places she hadn't been in years. People sought her out, not for gossip or sympathy, but for advice, for stories, for grounding. She'd become a quiet matriarch of the neighborhood, the woman who had stood her ground and come out stronger. She received letters occasionally, some from old friends, others from strangers who had followed the court case and had found courage in her story. One came from a woman in another state, a mother in her 60s who had lost her daughter and was fighting to keep custody of her grandchild from a manipulative ex-son-in-law. Mary read it late one night and cried, not out of grief, but solidarity. She wrote back. They exchanged letters for months, Amara, for her part, grew into a quiet force. She kept up with school, helped with chores, made friends, and slowly began to step into the world as a woman who knew where she came from. On her mother's birthday, she hosted a small dinner in the backyard. Just family friends, neighbors, and a few of Joyce's old colleagues. They lit candles, shared stories, and passed around Joyce's favorite dishes. Mary watched from her seat, marveling at how Amara moved between guests with ease and warmth, how she spoke of her mother with grace and without breaking down. The grief was still there, but it had changed shape. It no longer consumed. It accompanied. Late that night, after the guests had gone, Amara sat beside her on the porch again. "I want to plant a tree," she said, "for her, out front." Mary turned to her. "What kind?" "I'm not sure. Something that blooms in spring. Something with roots." Mary smiled, her throat thick. "Then we'll find the perfect one." A week later, they planted a cherry blossom tree in the front yard. They dug the hole together, set the sapling carefully, and watered it slowly, letting the earth settle around it. Mary placed her hand on the bark once it stood upright, slender and young, but full of promise. "This will outlive us both," she said quietly. "Good," Amara replied. "That's the point." In the months that followed, Mary found herself not only caring for the house, but tending to the legacy it now held. She began writing more. Letters, journal entries, even a short piece for a local magazine on aging in place and intergenerational living. Leah encouraged her to speak publicly about her experience, and though Mary declined the larger events, she agreed to a panel at the community center, where she sat beside two other grandmothers and spoke about family, justice, and staying grounded when the world tried to move you. As the year turned and the leaves began to shift into their autumn colors, Mary stood one morning at the window, watching Amara walk to the car with her backpack slung over one shoulder. She waved as her granddaughter looked back and smiled. The sight filled her with a warmth that went deeper than pride. It was legacy. She turned from the window and walked through the house, her fingers brushing the walls as she passed. The creaks in the floorboards were familiar now, the smells of lavender and old books mingling with the scent of morning coffee. The house was no longer just a shelter or even a memory. It was alive. It breathed with them. Mary stopped at Joyce's room, now Amara's, and looked inside. The posters on the wall had changed, but the feeling remained. It was a room of growth, of learning, of becoming. She closed the door softly and walked back downstairs. In the kitchen, she opened the notebook she had been filling with letters and reflections and added a final line. She did not just leave behind a house. She left a future, and we're still living in it. She closed the notebook and placed it gently beside the letter Joyce had written her. Then she picked up her tea, stepped onto the porch, and watched the cherry blossom tree sway gently in the breeze, already taller than she remembered. It would bloom soon. It would bloom every year. And long after she was gone, it would still reach for the sky. Just like Joyce had. Just like Amara would. And that was legacy. That was continuation. That was home. This story spoke to you. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next one. Watch the others. They carry more than memory. And if someone you know needs to hear this, share it. Stories only live if we pass them on.